I'm going to be speaking to you about a new uranium company focused in the Athabasca Basin called Aero Energy. And on this front slide here, I've got hunting uranium on the frontier north rim of the Athabasca Basin. And I use that word frontier carefully because even in Saskatchewan, after all these decades of successful exploration and high-grade mining, there's still places on the edge of the basin that don't really have much modern exploration, and I think still provide great opportunity for shallow discovery. Okay, I'll skip that. Of course, I will be making some good-looking or some forward-looking statements. Yeah. Freudian slip. So where are we starting? You know, the company is very new. We just finished raising $5.9 million at the beginning of this year. A couple months ago, actually, we closed that. And where we're starting, we're looking at over 50 shallow drill-ready targets where 2 project vendors have spent $7.6 million and what I would call preliminary first-pass exploration since 2020. Working up targets, doing the good permitting work, doing the good community engagement work, a little bit of first pass drilling that got some really good sniffs of uranium that really needs to be followed up on. We're looking in Saskatchewan's first uranium district, the Uranium City area. The area produced something like 70 million pounds of U3O8 between the 1950s and the 1980s from rocks that today we might call the wrong rocks. But I'm going to show you why all of the right rocks are there and why they look good. Really, you know, that's the 2 great characteristics, but of course the team is very important here as well. And myself, I'm a geologist going back 20 years or so, although in the last 5 years I've been very capital markets focused, but there's some very, very strong uranium people who are joining us on this company. And lastly, valuation. You know, I say this a lot, but there's a special torque in Canadian uranium discovery, a very special torque that I think is unique. You know, most recently, of course, the next gens and the fissions of the world. But I mean, if you rewind back to the 1950s when uranium was first getting started, you know, the same types of things happened then too. So I'll briefly introduce the team. I think very important, and of course I don't have time to talk about everyone, so just be as high level as I can here. So myself, Galen, I'm a geologist going back about 20 years. My relevant experience here is that I was managing the drilling for Next Gen Energy between about 2014 and 2018. So I was lucky enough really to have front row seats to that value creation and that discovery from becoming an interesting project, an interesting prospect to, I think, fairly easy to say, the best undeveloped high-grade uranium deposit in the world. Also relevant on this slide, just joining us on the board, Grace Marisitz, who's the former CFO of NextGen, worked very closely with me there at that time. And the technical team. You know, I think collectively between these people have discovered a lot of pounds in the basin, hundreds of millions of pounds. Garrett Ainsworth, the former NextGen, former VP Exploration for NextGen, Dale Varan, the former VP Exploration of Denison, Sean Hilliker worked very closely with me at NextGen, and then Gareth Garlick has got a lot of experience throughout the basin as well. The capital structure, we've got about 96 million shares outstanding, excuse me. Share price today of 14 cents, so that gives us a market cap of about $13.5 million. And like I was saying, just finished raising $5.9 million. We're fully funded to test somewhere between 20 and 25 targets this summer. So I think of that as between 20 and 25 shots on goal. Okay, now specifically to start talking about the projects. Here we are in Saskatchewan. This is the Athabasca Basin. Of course, we all know, everyone knows that this is a very prolific producing area. Going back to the beginning, and I'll use my laser pointer here. You know, here is where most of the production and discovery has come from. This is where the Camacos and the Oranos and the Denisons are. You know, I like to look at it in a way where I think back in time. You know, so I think back to 2010 and prior to about 2012. You know, this southwestern margin of the basin was more or less the Wild West, where, you know, the next gens weren't discovered, the fissions weren't discovered. But of course, Garrett's discovery of the Boulder Field led to the discovery of Triple R and then to Aero. Well, I look where we are up here in the northern portion of the basin, the northern margin, and I see something very similar, where we've got all of the hallmarks for a good discovery, but no real systematic modern exploration, or at least in 50 years. So I'm just going to zoom into our projects now. Here we are in the north rim of the basin. Our projects are in blue. The Athabasca Basin is in yellow, so we're just at the edge of it. Every little dot there is a uranium showing at surface. So you can go to these places and you can sample 10% U3O8, 27% U3O8. The project, one of the projects actually hosts formerly the largest uranium producer in the world in the 1950s, called Gunner. But I would say that all of these showings, the vast majority of them, are in quote unquote the wrong rocks, where typically the historic grade in this area was 0.2%, something like that, 0.25%. Not what we would look for today. Today we're looking for these things that are 1-2% plus. And when I say right rocks versus wrong rocks, not to get too far into the weeds here, but this slide just helps me draw attention to that, where historically, in the 1950s, the things that they were looking for were like this, weathered high in like a granite or something like that. It's anything that a prospector could walk over with a scintillometer, a radioactivity detector, pass over it, and if he has a hit, he starts digging. And sometimes they were big enough to be commercial, but oftentimes not. But what they couldn't have seen, what they wouldn't even have known about, what we look for today are these deposits in these basement fault zones. They generally sit in valleys. They're covered. So if you're walking over that with a radioactivity device, like a scintillometer, you're not going to see them. You're not even going to know they're there. But those rocks are there, and they look to be very fertile. So here's zooming into two of the projects. This is Sundog and Mermack, with Sundog on the bottom left, the southwest, and Mermack in the northeast, where we've got a trend of more or less 30 kilometers, along which there are multiple target horizons. These green, oh, excuse me, I'll go back. These green strips, those are the fault zones that we're looking for, the graphitic conductors that we're looking for. And if we start up here in the northeast, you move from 1% at surface, 6% at surface, 8% at surface, 15,000 counts per second of radioactivity in a radioactive spring. So that's just a groundwater seep at surface that you can walk up to with a scintillometer, and you get 15,000 counts per second. That's very rare. Move further to the southwest, you can go and sample 9.5% here at Stewart Island, 12% there at Johnston Island, and there's conductors and target rocks there that are not drilled or not tested. So this is just, we're working up targets now to start drilling in about a month, but this just zooms into one of them, and you'll see all of those bullseyes up there on that map. Those are targets, and it looks like it's a bit of a scattershot approach, but I can assure you each one of those is very carefully chosen, and it's a very target-rich environment. Where we're looking at starting here, say 4,000 meters of drilling and 20 targets, that's about 20 shots on goal. And the nice thing about this area is that your average hole depth is probably 200 meters. So, if it's $500 a meter to drill here, which about it is, multiply those two together, that's about $100,000 per test. So when I think about a cost per test metric, that's pretty good. We don't have to drill through 200, 300, 400, 500 meters of Athabasca sandstone to get to the targets here. They're almost right at surface. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is just an area that hasn't seen that exploration, so that opportunity, the shallow opportunities, are still there. And when I was first looking at these projects, and asking myself, do we want to do this or not? I like to look for whatever I'm working on. I like to look for good comps, good analogs. So I look at this and I say, okay, well, how do our projects on the right compare to something like the Patterson corridor on the left, where myself and Garrett, both of us, I'd say, lucky enough to have front row seats to over $5 billion in value creation. And I'm not saying one is the other by any means, but I look and I just see some similarities. They're both northeast trending structures. They're both on the edge of the Athabasca Basin. At the time before they were tested, not really looked at in a modern sense, especially for the Patterson corridor going back almost 15 years now, not that long ago. And then I look at ours and I think to myself, okay, look at all these targets, look at all the uranium at surface. Nothing's really drilled. This is almost a no-brainer. Other project called Strike, I don't need to go too much into detail on this one because the targets are largely the same. But the one thing I want to point out here is there's a zone of mineralization called the Tenna Zone right there. That produced in the 1950s something like 1,000 tons. Not big, but between 0.6 and 3.5% U3O8. Well, that was in the right rocks, so in those graphitic conductors. So for us, that's like a proof of concept. Okay, well, the right type of stuff is here. Now, where's the big deposit? So what are we doing here? Well, we like I said, we completed a financing. We're just finishing up some geophysics. Because the vendors of these projects did so much work in the last 4 years, there's a lot of drill-ready targets that we're going to step up and start drilling, mobilizing in here in the first week of June. So the idea is to test as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And the analogy I like to use is that we'll have something like 20 to 25 shots on goal, just this summer. And lots more to drill, more targets being developed. So far, I think it's safe to say there's 50 drill-ready targets, and 10,000 meters can be easily justified. So that's it. I see I'm 15 seconds over. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jeff, for having me. And we'll be at our booth here for the next couple days.